I want us to keep in mind as we begin this study is first, his strength was from God, and it's not a mark of personal greatness. Okay, strength was from God, and it's not a mark of his necessary personal greatness. The sickness is this weakness that he had continually undermined and undercut everything that he could have accomplished um, because of that weakness. So, but even so, we see how God still used Samson to deliver the people and get reprieve against the Philistines, even to the point of his last act, which was a decisive blow to the Philistines. So that's why I mean it's kind of confusing. We looked at some of these judges in the past, and you kind of wonder, well, how does God pick these people? And they all have a unique message, and of course, Samson is as well. So if you want to open up 13, look at it as we're kind of scrolling through. We're going to kind of go down through them. Like I said, I may pause and look at a particular verse, bring something out on it. So if you want to kind of roll along with me on that as well. So when we look at his birth alone, it's kind of an interesting situation. And the context of what's going on is just a typical scenario for the children of Israel. What is it? Backsliding again, right? And so the people cry out. Now, this one we don't necessarily see where, the crying out and then the Lord did this. And I think that's kind of maybe by this point in the period of Judges that the people had to reach a certain condition, of course, before, God was going to go ahead and bring them a deliverer, a judge. So that's a situation we find. But so when we see that, who are they being oppressed by? Well, the Philistines. And who are the Philistines? Well, they're among the most vile group in this area here. The biggest thorn in their side, all the way through up to and including King David's reign. King David finally does put them into suppression. I also understand that there were 5 cities of the Philistines, and they weren't united. It wasn't like the nation of the Philistines. It was a conglomerate of a culture of people, but they had kings ruling in those cities, which was kind of an advantage at times because you couldn't get them necessarily always to unite together. They had their own power plays as well. So them being oppressed by them, we see that the very opening scene is we find one, they did sight, they did evil. God gave them over into the Philistines' hands for 40 years. And then we're introduced to a certain man of Zorah. He's where he comes from the Danites. Now, if you look on the map up there, you can see it's just north of the Philistine area. And him and his wife could not have children. Now, this seemed to be kind of a common theme with God when we find him bringing among somebody that he's going to choose, that we find people who are barren or some form of a miraculous conception of a child. Sarah, Rachel, Mary, miraculous, right? So what's the thought there? What do you think? Why does God do that? One, it helps, I think, set apart the fact that it's God doing this work, especially to the parents. I mean, Mary knew what she did and didn't do, and yet she was with child. Had to convince Joseph, but then Sarah and Abraham. We know without a doubt. I mean, they wanted a child for so long. They worked all sorts of different schemes trying to figure out how they were going to have a descendant, and every one of their plans blew up in their face. God told them, no, it's you. So we see that it's kind of that setting apart of these individuals, and it makes it a little bit more of supernatural, outside the human capabilities of 2 individuals to have a child. And so that automatically, and people can identify that. They'll know that, well, they've never been able to have a child. Hannah, right? Even with Samuel, we find that she was neglected, and I don't know that she was barren. That was never inferred. But it's this idea that these people, are somebody who are identified as people who cannot have children, and then they have one. And so it automatically sets an identifying marker to the parents and to this person. So they're not able, but she gets a visit, doesn't she? A visit. Now, it's interesting. We don't have her name. We have the father's name, Manoah, but is visited by an angel, and this angel tells her this child is going to be a Nazirite from birth. Now, a Nazirite, Nazar, is where it comes from in the Hebrew. It doesn't mean they're from Nazarene. I know a lot of times, it sounds silly, but sometimes there was times where I thought, well, that's kind of the same word, isn't it? Nazarene, Nazareth, where was Jesus born? No, it wasn't Nazarene, was it? But where did he come from? He came out of, he's called Jesus the Nazarene, which he wasn't really, but he lived there. But it's not the same. It does not, I don't know the origin of that, but it's not the same. So when you say that a child is going to be a Nazarene from birth, well, that doesn't even fit the law. I mean, a baby that's in the womb, already that's kind of like, what is a Nazarene vow? What was the purpose? So how does an infant, a prenatal infant, see? It kind of like, so, but he puts the mother under a Nazirite vow, doesn't he? And it tells her, you need to now basically follow the Nazirite vow because the child within you is going to be a Nazarene. Now, you always have plans for your children. You always like, oh yeah, my kid's going to grow up and be a doctor. He's going to be a lawyer. He's going to do this or that. And then you can see as kids grow up and you say, you're a Nazarene. You can't eat chocolate. That's not part of the vow, but just tell a kid that he can't do something. And just normal biological testosterone, pubical growing teenagers, that would be hard to convince them how important this is. This child is having no choice of his own. And this is also where we see, where God never dominates an individual and just says, you're my robot, like God's like a puppeteer. Never has he done that with the Holy Spirit, even in the apostles. God was not some, Holy Spirit puppeteering, the apostles. We see that in the behavior of Peter. Some of the apostles, their behaviors, they were still extremely in control of who they were. And this is kind of thrust upon him. I'm kind of giving him a little defense here, aren't I? I mean, he didn't pick it. He didn't get to say, I love God so much and I'm so spiritual, oh yes, I'm joining. We don't have any of that. We almost get the opposite based on his behavior. That this was something that was kind of thrust upon him by his parents. The parents are to blame for everything. Never let me do this, never let me do that. I can almost hear little Samson, just kind of that teenage attitude and it's biologically normal, kids go through kind of a rebellious stage. But it didn't change the purpose of what God was going to do, you see? And God, it's interesting, God wasn't dumb about this. We know the Lord knows what's going to happen. He can look and see what's going to happen. Even with broken people, even with those who struggle in their faith and things like this. This is one of the more complex judges as well, not only just from the morality issue, I think, but also the mission and the way it's accomplished. Well, the mission is the same. Break this type of bondage away from an enemy. That's kind of a common theme, is to break them away and deliver them into prosperity and peace and reconciliation back to God. So from birth, no wine, no unclean things, and no haircut, right? This announcement, though, is supernatural. I mean, it's not something normal. And so this is the idea of being preordained from birth, receiving that Nazirite vow when he was not even conceived yet. We see the time of this is during a time of oppression that, again, he's born into. The other judges, they were adults. They had some memory of, the oppression and the relationship. He was born into a situation where they were already being ruled by the Philistines. I'm sure he heard stories and stuff, but it's different, when you're born into that situation versus, you're an adult and you've been living it and you've had experience of this oppression, but now you come out now, and we don't know, like did they have like the Nazarene talk to their son? At some point, I mean, you can't. You could tell a 1-year-old, and he'd look at you like what? Goo goo gaga. 1-year-old, 3-year-old, maybe a 5-year-old. Maybe they'd start to go, okay, I'm a Nazirite. But it wouldn't have that impact until they become more self-aware. And then every one of us have that spiritual journey where we have to make a choice on, how am I going to behave? What am I going to do? And then having that on his shoulders, I mean, so this is a timing. I think it also reminds us the timing that God raises up deliverers in moments of the deepest need. And when a lot of times the nation is at its spiritually weakest point. And then he brings out somebody that just shocks them. It's like, who? Who? This manner of announcement again is unique because we have the unborn. It's not unique in the sense of an angel announcing, because we saw Gideon. Gideon had this conversation with the exact same angel, by the way. And what's interesting is when you look at that announcement, as you look at just the whole encounter between the wife and the husband, Manoah, this is the angel of the Lord. So this is Christology. This is a Christ type. In other words, Christ hadn't come yet, but this is very, very powerfully showing that this is the Son of the Godhead. And that's what, to me, it always blows my mind. I keep telling you, every time I see that, and we've already seen it twice in this book of Judges alone, where it's actually Jesus himself that comes. There's similarities as well, because when he comes and talks to Gideon, and Gideon then wants to, bring him food, what does the angel of the Lord do with Gideon? He says, put it on the stone. And it becomes a burnt offering. The same thing when, first off, when the wife comes, she tells the husband, and she's kind of shaken. You could tell they're spiritual because of the fear and reverence they have for the situation, the impact. And I love this because, the way that Manoah, you can tell he's a spiritual person because the first thing he does is he prays. Help me. What are you talking about here? I mean, you hear it secondhand, but as the father, it's like, what are we getting ourselves into? It's important to see that he seeks out, this type of a clarity and guidance from God himself. And so he prays what? For the return of the messenger. That's, in a couple of ways, if you were to honestly pray that Jesus would show up, you really want him to show up and look you in the eye? It'd be a little frightening, but he wants it. He wants to talk to him. And the angel repeats those instructions. And then when Manoah offers his hospitality, he's told, just like with Gideon, basically turn this into a burnt offering. And then he goes up with it, disappears. And then the fear comes on them. I love that little conversation between the husband and the wife when they look. I can just see Manoah looking over and them looking at each other and saying, we are in the presence of God. We're going to die. And wives have this great way, of saying, both husband and wives, that's why together sometimes, she goes, well, wait a minute. If we're going to have this child, why is he going to kill us for being in the presence of him? It's kind of like, oh, yeah, I guess that's a good point, right? I mean, he's not going to kill us. So, she reads that there's no way that he accepted their offering and promised a child. So he's not going to destroy us. But I just thought that even in the moment when you see him, when you're seeing the Lord, or your faith is the strongest, sometimes we trip a little bit, and go, whoa, whoa, wait a minute. The most ridiculous thought is, he's given you this blessing, and now he's going to kill you because you were in his presence. And guess who? And it wasn't your fault that you were in his presence, right? He came to you. He came to you. So, but that shows reverence, fear, respect, that they hallow his name, and all of that. So through the prayer, this interaction, the offer of hospitality, and the witnesses, the way they witness the angel disappear, brings that fear, but also the reassurance. Okay, we know now we're going to have a child, and we need to follow the instructions. She has to live like a Nazirite, follow those rules, and then raise him as one as well. One of the things in 14 to 15, we find right away, that as he grows, he's not the same type of person. He's a different type of person. We see it actually 13:25, 24 and 25 of chapter 13. And the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, and the young man grew, and the Lord blessed him. Doesn't say anything about his behavior. Blessed him. Doesn't say anything about his behavior. I mean, we don't know anything of this. We just see that regardless, the Lord is blessing this boy. Why? Because he's promised that. That's the part of the promise. And then 25, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. And that, to me, is, I think, the closest we can see where God's providential interaction with us as well today. A lot of times we don't know why we do certain things, maybe. Maybe that's the way the Lord is helping us providentially through a non-miraculous way of, kind of like that little voice in your own head. You're talking to yourself and you're going, I really should do this, or, whoa, maybe I should think about this. Or others, I need to go help this person. And you had no idea this person maybe need it, but those are the ways that we know God cares for us and the way God blesses us. It doesn't have to be supernatural. He works through people. And it doesn't mean that he's talking in their heads and saying, Ron, you need to go do this. But this is kind of this aspect of providentially helping guide him towards it, not forcing him. That we can clearly tell, because Samson doesn't follow him clean, purely all the way through any of this, does he? So this early display of strength, right away, he sets out. The very first story, we have a conflict, don't we? We have a conflict. He immediately sees a Philistine girl, and he wants to marry her and demands it. I mean, almost like a little brat. It sounds like it, doesn't it? I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines in Timnah. Get her now for me as my wife. Well, if you were a parent, right? You'd go, are you crazy? No, you're a Nazirite. That's defiled. That would be a defiled marriage in a sense. And so right away we see with this engagement that he wants, and he demands it. And they said, is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among our people that you must go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Samson said to the father, get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. Now remember what we start with. The Lord started stirring his spirit. Okay? Now, I don't know about the tone. We weren't there, but it doesn't seem to be like negotiable. He is like, no, I saw her. I'm going to marry her. The answer to this really is where we see in chapter 14. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. Now that, again, what is their marriage requirements? Their guidance by God about this type of situation. Don't do it, right? Don't mingle. Don't marry Gentile women. That was a part of it. Don't have marriages that are from these pagan nations. Because of why? Because of the influence that it would have on, their spiritual serving of God, that if you marry in these other women of other cultures, so it was a forbidden thing by God. Make you question, make you stop and go, well, wait a minute, he's doing what he's basically told them not to do. And his parents are right to say no. See the conflict? Now, I don't have an exact application modern wise, but there's times that this type of situation happens. Or sometimes maybe the grace of God is more powerful than your interpretation of the legitimacy of following the letter of the law. You follow? And it seems like that it's so against God that I can't do that. But maybe, and I don't know how to interpret it either. I don't know how I could sit and say, oh, well, I could justify this because, we've got Samson, and Samson was doing something that God said don't do, and he went and married this person, and so I'm going to go follow that. But this is a bizarre situation. It's a paradox. It's like God is directing it, God yet is against it, but he's purposing it.
Yeah, a lot of people like this when lights not supposed to with another nation. So say, oh, see, God said you can't racial marry, all this stuff. But like what you're saying, God didn't want lights to accept their gods. And maybe God, I was thinking, but if that's the reason, that's what God said that's they want their gods, um, follow their gods. So they would marry like a woman from another nation, but not. But then they would that person follow God. That would be like a different.
Well, you look at the book of Ruth, right? Where Naomi, that was totally forbidden. One, they should have never left. They should have never gone to Moab, right? Sons marry Moabitess. They all die. She comes back with a Moabitess, and that she ends up being in the genealogy of Jesus. Rahab. So that's what I mean. This is where people who are real legalists lose their mind. They can't get out of this logic that's very evident scripturally, where you see that there are exceptions. You see? That's what I'm trying to bring out. And it's a dangerous one for me to bring up, but it's a fact where we can see where there's times where they should have been doing something like going off to Moab, marrying Moabitess, bringing back a Moabitess, and all of a sudden a Moabitess becomes one of the most blessed women. Now, one thing is they weren't always forbidden necessarily down the line. I mean, there was some things. I mean, if they convert, but there's some situations. But the general rule, no. Another thing that where I almost see a little bit of spiritualness in the parents is that this is during the time we just said of the lowest spiritualness of the nation. The people were at their lowest religiosity. They're not very spiritual. So that, kind of like in America, a lot of Christians, unfortunately, have allowed themselves to just get along, and they just let things go. And then, well, it's two men marrying. Oh, well, and then bother them. And then churches are now accepting them into their congregations, right? Because we're at a very spiritual low in our nation. So that coming back and applying that to this situation, I almost think spiritually, as far as the nation and the people, a lot of them would have went, not good, but they didn't care. They weren't really that faithful themselves. But the parents were, in spite of it, which reflects why God chose them, chose them to be the parents. How heartbreaking it must have been for their parents to not understand. It never said that the Lord then showed up and said, hey, it's okay, Manoah. It's okay. We got this. We're doing this. This is a part of my plan. God didn't do that. Just like with Job, he didn't go and tell Job, hey, this is why everything's going on. Never told him. So that's what I mean. It makes us, to me, these are those filters where God tests the purity of your love for him first. For him first. And not be pharisaical to the point of a fault. That's what the Pharisees were doing. You know, whenever you're going to let people be hungry and you're going to condemn them because they walked through a wheat field and they got some grain, but they're dying. David, remember David when he went to the tabernacle and he ate the showbread? And it's like, even that's what Jesus brought up. He goes, hey, don't you recall? That was also against it. And it's like the legalist, you can almost see them kind of vapor lock. It's like, well, no, I mean, that should be humbling to check ourselves. You know, when we get, too far legalistic, remember about the grace of God. What is God doing? What's the bigger picture here? And just like with Samuel, sacrifice or obedience. And you'd say, well, wait, sacrifice is a part. No, he wants obedience first from the heart. Anyway, I dig into that a lot. So as they're going over, they're traveling along, we see that verse 6, the Spirit of the Lord rushes on him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he just kills this lion, tears it to pieces. It says, as one tears a young goat, just shreds it, brutalizes it. But he didn't tell his mom or dad. So they go down, they make this arrangement, right? He kills the lion, and then they make the arrangement for the wedding. And when they go to have this, we see this wedding scenario, this custom, I guess, at this feast was kind of like a large bachelor party or kind of a thing where the guys, so they surround him with these 30 guys, and you can just imagine there's racism between them both. These Philistines don't want this dirty Hebrew to marry into the Philistines either. This is the wedge. This is where God is using it. And so he comes up with this riddle, right? Out of the either came something, and out of the strong came something sweet. And that's that same line I kind of ran across the top of the other aspect of this, is that later when they come back, that lion, he sees the carcass, and in that carcass is honey and bees. And so, puts that in his hat. And when I imagine he's, you can't imagine being all these 30 Philistines, and they're probably not real friendly, but faking it. And so he throws out this challenge to them. Solve this riddle. And if you can't solve it, you give me 30 linen garments, 30 changes of clothes. That's outer and inner garments, in other words, which is kind of weird. But it's not to them, because that's a lot of money. 30. Clothes weren't like the way we do. You go to Walmart, you pick up something and you don't like it, you throw it in the Goodwill, you just go and get you some more. These clothes were expensive. So he's talking about underdressing and then everything. So, but if I lose, okay, I'll pay you the 30. But they can't solve the riddle during this 7-day period, and they put pressure on his wife. You got to get the answer to this. And of course, we see Samson's wife. She weeps over him. You hate me. You don't love me. You have put a riddle to my people, but you have not told me what it is. And he said to her, behold, I haven't told my mother or father. Why should I tell you? She keeps on, in the 7 days, finally, he tells her. And they solve the riddle. He's pretty brutal in verse 18 when they answer it. He says, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. You can read that what you want, but basically it's pretty derogatory. Now, it doesn't say they had any type of intimate relationship with her or anything, but he's basically calling both of them. It's what they've done to him. And then 19, Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. So we see this again. Where's his motivation coming from? He strikes down 30 men of the town, takes the spoil, gives the garments to those who had told the riddle. In his hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife had been given to his companion, who had been his best man. We don't know timeline. We don't know, was he gone a week? He's gone at least probably a day. I mean, it's not like they travel like we do, modern, he's probably walking. But the whole time while he's gone, immediately, um, automatically, total disregard for him. And so, after some days of times, he goes to visit his wife, the young goat. He said he wants to go down there, and when he gets down there, he finds this out. And her father says, I really thought you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your champion. So is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do harm to them. So using 30 foxes, this is another one. It's a great story. 300, sorry. He takes 300 foxes, puts torches, and then turns them tail to tail and put a torch between them and just sets them loose. And, if you know wildfires, I mean, once it goes, and this is destroying their food source. And in that, then we see, they ask, who's done this? And they find out it's Samson, the son-in-law. Wait a minute, I thought he gave his wife away. Oh, no, he's son-in-law, right? And so the Philistines turn on the wife, and the Philistines come up, verse 6 there, and burn her and her father with fire. It's total, that was totally their fault. Well, I guess you could say because he was treacherous in the way he dealt with Samson, and because the way they dealt with Samson, which triggered this whole thing. But, it kind of just shows the ruthlessness as well of them. And so he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow. He went down and he stayed in the cleft of the rock. So now they then turn and they come up and encamp against Judah because they want to capture him. They want to bring him back to justice. And Judah's quick to do it. Turn him over, huh? They're like, yeah, but why? Because they're weak in faith, and they're being ruled by the Philistines, and they're going to be punished by the Philistines, and they don't want any fight. So, don't you know the Philistines rule over us? They ask him. And so they say, we've come to bind you, that we can turn you over to him. And Sam says, you swear that you will not attack me yourselves? Now think about it. He can break free. It's going to end up happening, but Samson is setting this whole thing up to where he's basically going to false surrender, right? And then he's going to turn around. They say, oh, no, we're just going to bind you and turn you over. So they turn him over, and then he finds a fresh jawbone of a donkey, put it out his hand, he took it, and he struck 1,000 men. So he kills, we see this great display of strength again. Nothing seems to be able to bind him. And then we move to the point where it says, we have this interesting verse transition between on verse 20, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. At the end of this story of Samson, we hear it gives the same number of years. So at first I thought, well, is that 20 years to that point? To a point where we come in to Samson and Delilah, and then the additional seems to be that the writer has given us a total time of 20 years here. So, but there is some years in between this event, and then we see this Samson's his failings, his impulsive actions, that right away, choosing the Philistine wife, his outburst, his riddle, seems to be that. But again, you look at what God's objective is trying to do, using revenge. But then again, so this pattern is a pattern of impulsiveness driven by that emotion. And not, it doesn't seem like he has a strategic purpose. It just seems to be situational where things are happening. Um, and it makes me think he is not really connected to God. God is causing the affliction on the Philistines, but I don't know. I've always thought, Samson just doesn't seem to have this plan. It's kind of like a out of control grenade. It's just, he just goes off and it does, and it is working. I mean, it's causing what God wanted, and that is to inflict damage on the Philistines. So we see God continually work through him, I think, despite his flaws. His lack of self-control in some of these, I think, you already kind of see the chaoticness of it, that it's holding him back from really rising to be that lightning rod of a leader that could have helped them accomplish probably much, much more in this situation. So then we have this relationship with Delilah in 16. He goes down. She's a prostitute, it says in verse 1, has relationships with her. And the Gazites see this is a subgroup of the Philistines. They find out, whoa, here's that guy. They hate him. He's probably grown a pretty big reputation. So they want to surround and try to ambush him at the city gate. But everything they do, it fails, right? Everything that they're doing on their own is going to fail. It's only he is the one that causes his own demise. And he plays that game with her. She's, oh, tell me what it is. Oh, well, if you do this. And then she does it. And he breaks free and he kills the people who came in. And wouldn't you finally get a...
That's what I was going to say. After you would tell her, mind to her, but tell her, well, this, and I'll lose all my strength. Then it happened. I would, I'm not going to tell her, but tell her them. Or I don't know why you did it like that.
Didn't this happen to him already with his wife? She betrayed him. Whoa, you gonna tell me? And then, okay, this is a... And then what did he call her? He's been betrayed. It's not like the first woman, to betray him. Where's his mind? It's weird.
Realizing, or ways to like that, maybe he feels kind of entitled, but sometimes you just don't think somebody's going to do that to you that happens to somebody else. So this,
Well, and to this point, he's been victorious every time. There's never been a Philistine been able to beat him. Everything they've tried to do to him, he's killed them. This is where I wonder, is he praying to the Lord? Is he even seeking him? That's another thing. Go ahead, Gary.
Seems to me also a little naive, and when a woman nags at him, he just gives up. And, that's one of his weaknesses. When a woman nags at him, fine, okay.
But
he feels it invincible too. I believe it's like, nobody can.
he's playing games with her, isn't he? He's playing a very dangerous game. It's like, yeah, and she obviously is a part of it, because then she shouts out the alarm that they're here. It's not like they run into the tent and they're both sound asleep. She's alerting Samson. Yeah. See? So it's even more belligerent.
But behind all of this, probably consequence.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the one thing that no matter how broken, you should see that in the Kings. The Kings, that where the engagement between the house of David and the northern kingdom. I just saw a historical thing where the king, I can't remember his name, he of Judah has his son marry Jezebel and Ahab's daughter. Tyla was her name. And God had put a curse on the house of Ahab, saying, all your bloodline will die. So now you've got the bloodline of Judah, who David's seed has to come through, is in this condemnation. But God ends up, whenever the king of Judah is killed, Ahab's killed, Thyla, which is Jezebel's daughter, ends up ruling and dominating as queen. She kills all the sons. But priest hides one son, Joash, in the temple. And there's the way God answered it. So it's like no matter what happens, it just keeps blowing my mind. And no matter what we do, we're not going to get in God's way. God is going to do what he said he's going to do. That's why it's the pinnacle of it all is really Satan getting Jesus crucified and thinking that he won. That's like the most historical, biggest joke. I mean, it was like you walked right into that. You actually defeated yourself by killing the seed that you thought was so dangerous. And this is just one of those again where it's like, so in a personal way, we have to be careful. We either sell ourselves too short, think we're not valuable, think that we can't accomplish our little piece of the gospel kingdom or what we're doing. But God is going to fulfill the success and the victory of the kingdom, with or without us, maybe even through us. And we're not just along for the ride, but, lead, follow, get out of the way. But God is going to accomplish it. And and the other thing is, even in my blunderings, even in our blunderings, God can still use that to move the kingdom forward. So even when we fail and we disappoint the Lord and commit something that's horrible, maybe, God could still use us, okay? That's another one that's real hopeful. I mean, look at Samson.
I noticed in 22 it said Samson did not know that the Lord had departed.
Yeah, that's the typical statement from a sinner, a Christian who falls away. I shouldn't say sinner, a Christian who falls away. They wake up in bondage of sin again, blind to the world, and they never even realize the Lord had left them. What, me? I go to church all the time. So? Is the Lord with you? That should be the most chilling question that we need to ask. Is the Lord with me? Or am I just faking it? Am I just, delusional and thinking, oh yeah, the Lord's with me. And that's, you're right. 22 is a bold statement of he never even saw it coming, right? He never saw it coming. So, his final act, after they have gouged out his eyes, bound him up, he's serving grinding meals. They bring him out during a fantastic, huge celebration. And you can't get more humiliated as a man of God than to be in bondage with the very people that you're supposed to be destroying and delivering your people from. Now you're in a dungeon grinding away at a grindstone and people are mocking you. And then they have this amazing celebration and all the leaders are just gawking. Look what we've captured.
He's blind.
You emboldened them, didn't you? And he's blind, he's helpless, But of course we see that, his hair's growing back and the Lord wasn't done with him. He didn't know it. He had to come to a repentant heart. The only time that we see that he finally talks to God is in verse 28. And Samson called on the name of the Lord, called to the Lord. That it's never, I'll say it's never too late, but it's very sad to have to get to that condition. Again, such a strong application to Christians that fall away. You know, and then I almost wonder, are we talking to the Lord? Have we been talking to him to begin with? Maybe we wouldn't have drifted away if we'd have been talking to him. We've been glorifying him for my victories of killing all those Philistines and just feeling that self-confidence that, well, my power's always there. You know, and the Christian saying, well, I always have forgiveness. I always got the blood of Christ. I can always just pray for forgiveness. I can just pray and say, oh, Lord, forgive me. Lord, forgive me. Lord, forgive me. The preacher always tells me all I got to do is ask forgiveness. I get forgiven. I get forgiven. But your heart's not changed. Your heart doesn't change. If your heart doesn't change, then you're in a false sense of repentance, and you're in a false saved condition, like Samson. And sadly, some Christians have to get to this point where they're so humiliated that then finally they turn. And you know what? The Lord listened to him. Not because of his great works. He deserved to be where he was at. But the Lord still had a promise. He had a promise. He'd deliver them from the Philistines. So even he brought this broken man up, back out of the mire of the dungeon, and still he was useful. That's almost all of our stories in a lot of ways, you know, that we're so bound up and we've done things in our lives that, you know, maybe we need to cry to the Lord, you know, and let him use us. Submit, you know. It's you know, his legacy is very powerful because he's such a unique one. That final redemption, you know, it brought the pagan temple down, Dagon. You know, sadly, he finally does pray. But the final act is both a judgment on Israel's enemies and a reminder that God can still work through a repentant, broken servant. I think that's something. You know, his moral weakness. That's why, you know, I titled the lesson, Samson, Great Strength and Great Weaknesses. It's almost, he had them both extremes. He had such great strength that no one has ever, to this day, like I said when he started the class, you know, all these things named Samson because of his power that no human has ever possessed, just out of this world and comprehending that strength. But in the same way, the other direction, such broken spirit and so vile of his behavior. His impulsiveness, you know, sometimes became that reckless with his divine calling. And Christians can be the same way. We can become reckless with our divine calling to serve God, right? His overconfidence in his strength, right? You know what could have been? He could have delivered him without this downfall of himself. He could have been a judge that went on. He could have made a more unified Israel. He could have had a much greater spiritual legacy. Now, this is where it gets kind of crazy. You're familiar with Hebrews 11. We consider it the heroes of faith. Listen to the names that are in there. And he says in Hebrews about in 11:32, what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. No, we just studied those guys, right? Gideon was kind of the coward, you know. He come out pretty good. Barak, I'll go if you go. Right? And then Samson. And then Jephthah, the one that sacrificed his daughter. They're in the heroes of faith. So could you put your name in there? You better believe it. Absolutely. You know, a lot of times we see, you know, like the Medal of Honor recipients, you know, and I see the war heroes and people who have done fantastic, great things. And I think I could never, ever be in that list, could not be in their presence. And I just demean myself. You know, somehow I just, you know, I'm not worthy. I can't do that. Yeah. But man, I remember the first time it dawned on me when I started reading those names. Samson? Rahab? I mean, we are all heroes of faith. And that's I think one of the great things. I think the big lesson is danger of ignoring our accountability. We are accountable as Christians. And you know, hopefully we won't live our lives like a journeying through our lives like a Samson and sporadically accomplishing things, but be self-aware, you know, to watch ourselves. That's kind of the great lesson. All right, that's the class for tonight. We're going to jump to 17 through 21 in Judges. So if you've got any thoughts, comments, closing things. It's a fun class. You know, I enjoyed this. You know, I mean, there's so many powerful personal lessons that we don't think can be there, and they are. Dark stories, but very powerful lessons. All right, well, I hope you can join us at 9:45 this coming Sunday morning. We're continuing to study the Gospel of Mark, and then in the evening, in the morning, lesson sermon. We've been going through the series of Peter. This Sunday, I'm going to do a lesson about who moved the stone, about the resurrection. Since it's that time of the year, let's talk about it. It's one of the things that we should talk about. And when you got people in the country talking about the resurrection, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it right. You know, let's bring the facts out on it. And then we're going through the prophet Isaiah. And then next week, we'll be back at 6 p.m. So until then, God bless.